our first speaker, Dr. Chintan. Bharat sir.
Thank you, Rahul. Good homework and very good organization for this event. For last 5 to 6 years, we are now having availability of immune check inhibitors, and that has changed the outlook of this Broomy disease. And now we cannot move away without the role of immune check inhibitors in the treatment of non-small cell lung cancer in various stages and aspects. So today is the academic feast, and our opening speaker is Dr. Chintan Shah. He will be speaking on new era in unresectable stage 3 non-small cell lung cancer. Medical oncologist from HOC Vedant team, Dr. Chintan Shah. Over to him.
Thank you, sir, for the kind introduction. And this is the topic given to me. I hope my slides are visible.
Yeah.
And my voice is audible.
Yeah.
So, so this is the new era which has ushered in since last couple of years, I can say. And as we know that Globocon 2020 data in India, that lung cancer is again the most common cancer in men, and it accounts 90% of the patients diagnosed with lung cancer face fatality, and the survival rate is quite less. So what is the current management of unresected locally advanced NSCLC, especially when we are talking about stage 3 non-metastatic disease? So whenever a stage 3 patient comes, it's always a multidisciplinary team which decides on the treatment, which includes a medical, a radiation and surgeon, oncologist and a surgeon, and pulmonologist also. The basic baseline test done, pulmonary function test, bronchoscopy for the biopsy, then the FDG PET CT scan and MRI brain for staging. And again, for a surgical staging, we need mediastinal lymph node staging, which we will be discussing in the next slide. Overall, we all know that the definitive treatment for stage 3 disease, unresectable disease, is concurrent chemoradiation, which is preferred over sequential chemoradiation. So this is the nice algorithm of ESMO guideline about the loco-regional staging and treatment. So if you first see the CT scan and there are no enlarged lymph nodes and there is a peripheral tumor, so invasive lymph node staging, mediastinal staging, is not required if the lymph nodes are negative on PET scan. We can directly go for the surgery. And in surgery, if there is an unforeseen N2 disease, the patient will need adjuvant chemotherapy and radiotherapy. Second scenario, where there are no enlarged N2 nodes, but there is a central tumor or there is a hilar lymph node on the CT scan, then, or a PET CT scan, then we need a mediastinal staging, wherein we need to further divide it into whether it's N0 or N1, N2 or N3. N0 or N1 patient undergoes the same way upfront surgery, and based on the N2 disease, will need further adjuvant chemo and radiation. N2 disease, we need to see whether it's potentially resectable, especially a small single station N2, or it's a multiple station N2 disease. And this is to be decided by the multidisciplinary team, whether it's a single station N2 and then upfront surgery is possible, and surgical based multimodality treatment can be undertaken. N3 disease, again, it is a non-surgical treatment overall, just like an extensive N2 disease, where again, you don't need an invasive mediastinal staging and you go for non-surgical multimodality treatment, that is concurrent chemoradiation. So whenever we talk about stage 3 NSCLC being treated with concurrent chemoradiation, somebody asks us what's the intent. The intent is always curative for such patients. Most common chemotherapy regimes being used along with the radiation, as you can see, it was initially etoposide platinum, 2 cycles at 3 to 4 weeks gap. Then most of us have shifted to pemetrexed cisplatin or weekly paclitaxel carboplatin. Again, we all know by the data that concurrent is always better than sequential. In a fit patient who is able to tolerate, go for concurrent chemoradiation, because you can see the table on the right where you can see the median survival with concurrent is close to 24 months, while it is almost half of that when you are giving it sequentially. So what else can be done to increase the survival? So there have been trials of consolidating this treatment after concurrent chemoradiation, consolidation with the addition of some other chemotherapeutic drug like docetaxel or etoposide platinum, pemetrexed, increasing the dose of radiation. or giving some target therapy like cetuximab or gefitinib. Apart from gefitinib, most of them have failed to do so. So more chemotherapy addition leads to more toxicity and no improved survival. More radiation, again, same thing, more toxicity and there is no improvement in survival. Same thing for the cetuximab. So there is no FDA or European Union approved maintenance therapy for concurrent chemoradiation therapy. Further manipulations of existing chemotherapy drugs are unlikely to provide substantial survival benefit. So as we all know, despite the curative setting, we are dealing with survival rate and cure rates of only 15 to 25%. So this is quite less. When we are talking about cure, we need to have something more than this. So there comes the role of immuno-oncology in this scenario. And as we all know, immunotherapy does work well, especially in the inflammatory milieu. So what is the rationale behind this? So initially, when concurrent chemoradiation is given, there is upregulation of PD-L1, there is damage to the malignant cells, and there is a lot of inflammation in the surrounding microenvironment. So this forms the basis of using an PD-1 inhibitor or PD-L1, inhibitor whenever there is inflammatory milieu and upregulation of PD-1. So this was the rationale based on which the Pacific study was carried out. It was a phase 3 randomized double-blind placebo-controlled multi-central international trial where patients with stage 3 locally advanced unresectable NSCLC after receiving concurrent chemoradiation in which at least 2 cycles of chemo has been given and who have not progressed within first 42 days after completion of CTRT were involved in the trial. Obviously, they need to have a good performance status and good life expectancy. So the randomization arms were durvalumab 10 mg per kg every 2 weekly for 1 year versus placebo. 2:1 randomization was done and stratification was by the age, sex and smoking history. There were 2 primary endpoints. One was PFS by blinded independent central review and the other was OS. There were multiple secondary endpoints, one being overall response rate, duration of response, safety, tolerability and patient-related outcomes. So this is the baseline characteristics of the patient involved in this trial. So despite the stratification based on age, sex and smoking history, what we all are interested to know is what was the stratification based on the EGFR, what was the result based on the EGFR status and the PD-L1. So focusing on that, there were 6% of the patient in both the arms who were EGFR positive, a small proportion of patient. What about PD-L1? At that time, they classified PD-L1 based on the tumor cell component only, and it was again classified as less than 25% versus more than 25%. So around 25% to 20% of the patients were having high PD-L1, that is more than 25% PD-L1 expression. Another important thing is the older regimens, the systemic treatment was given initially and then concurrent chemoradiation was undertaken. Nowadays, we go for upfront chemoradiation because we know that initial induction chemo does not help much. So 25% of the patients in each arm did receive induction chemotherapy before undergoing concurrent chemoradiation. So another good and a different aspect was the method by which PFS was calculated. So as you know that PFS say in concurrent chemoradiation trial, the randomization starts at the start of concurrent CTRT. As you can see over here, in consolidation studies, the randomization starts after concurrent chemoradiation. That is around 6 weeks from the time of starting the treatment. While in Pacific, the randomization was allowed for up to 6 weeks of completion of concurrent chemoradiation. That is 12 weeks from the start of treatment. So at least we are counting the PFS quite late as compared to the other studies which are being done for concurrent CTRT or consolidation studies. Despite starting late, we did see a PFS benefit, which we are going to discuss in the next few slides. So what are the results and what are especially the updated 5-year OS and PFS results? So as you can see, the 2 lines, the OS and PFS, the hazard ratio for OS was 0.68. The confidence interval was well less within 1 and the p-value was highly significant. So it means there was a 32% risk reduction in terms of mortality. The PFS, the hazard ratio was 0.52. Again, confidence interval within 1 and p-value significant means there was 50% reduction in the risk of disease progression or death. And there were no new safety signals found and there was no detrimental effect on the patient-related outcomes. And hence this became another landmark data to confirm the previous approval of durvalumab in consolidation of stage 3 unresectable NSCLC. So if you can see the Kaplan-Meier curves, these are the Kaplan-Meier curve for the overall survival for intention to treat population. So graphs, the curves are separating quite early within first couple of months, and they are remaining separated even at 5 years. There is an absolute difference of 11% even at 5 years. The median survival, if you see, with placebo is 29 months, while it's 48 months with durvalumab. So 1.5 times, 50% gain in even in median overall survival, and 11% absolute benefit in overall survival with using durvalumab for 1 year as consolidation therapy. What about PFS by blinded independent central review? So again, the Kaplan-Meier curves are have separated quite early in the treatment within first 3 months, and they do remain separated even at 5 years. So with the placebo, 19% of the patients were disease-free, while with durvalumab, 33% of the patients were disease-free, nearly doubling of the PFS, you can say. Coming to the median PFS in placebo, it was close to 6 months, while it was 17 months in durvalumab. So here there is tripling of the median PFS. So you can say 1/3 of the patients in the durvalumab arm were alive and were also disease-free at 5 years. So it's quite a good thing. So we already had 2-year data, we had 3-year data, and now we have 5 and even 4 and 5 years data. So as longer the follow-up, and the hazard ratio, if you see, is near to 0.70 in all these years. So it has been consistent even in the 5th year. So this gives us more confidence to say that this drug is really working, and there is definitely some meaningful benefit derived in terms of PFS as well as OS. So coming to this forest plot, where there was some pre-specified subgroups, and there was at the last we'll discuss some post-hoc analysis of the PD-L1 status. So almost all the patients were benefiting, except you can see the EGFR positive population, where the last line is crossing midline, and the PD-L1 low population, less than 25%, you can see the line is crossing the midline, and that these are the two categories, that is EGFR mutated and low PD-L1 expression, were not benefiting with the addition of durvalumab. But if you see, there is also a post-hoc analysis in the last 3 lines, that is, especially the last 2, PD-L1 more than equal to 1% versus PD-L1 less than 1%. So patients with PD-L1 less than 1% again were not deriving benefit. But again, we have to keep in mind, this is the post-hoc analysis, this is hypothesis generating, and we need some more concrete data to put this into practice. So patterns of disease progression, the first progression by location. So as you can see, new lesions identified within the lung parenchyma, chest wall or diaphragm were classified as intrathoracic, and rest all well extrathoracic. So durvalumab, there were little more intrathoracic progressions compared to placebo, 80% versus 74%. But the time to intrathoracic progression was quite delayed when in the durvalumab arm, 9 months versus 25 months. So nearly you got 3 times more time to have an intrathoracic progression compared to the placebo arm. And hazard ratio was 0.55, and the Kaplan-Meier curves are in front of you. They're fantastic. Patterns of progression for the new extrathoracic lesion as first progression. So there was reduction in the new extrathoracic lesions in the durvalumab arm. It was 8% in the durvalumab arm compared to 16.5 in the placebo arm. So there was nearly 50% reduction in the incidence of extrathoracic lesions in durvalumab arm. Coming to the safety, almost grade 3-4 side effects were quite manageable. Discontinuation rate was slightly high, 15% with the durvalumab compared to 10% in placebo. Pneumonitis, any grade pneumonitis or radiation pneumonitis was a little higher, you can say quite higher in the durvalumab arm, 34% versus 24% in the placebo. So this was the major concern, except that most of the side effects were quite manageable. And there was another analysis of safety summary based on the time from radiation. So those patients who started quite early, within 14 days, had a higher incidence of pneumonitis with durvalumab compared to somebody who started after 14 days. So when to start durvalumab after concurrent chemoradiation? As per the trial, within 42 days. But there has been an analysis of French data of around nearly 600 patients. And out of the 600 patients, the trial design was the same. But the only difference was that you can read the right line in the bottom, that 40% of the patients started receiving durvalumab after 42 days of finishing the concurrent chemoradiation. That was quite against the PACIFIC trial. But you can see that data available of all these patients, disease control rate was 75%, which was quite similar to that seen in the PACIFIC trial. CR, PR stabilities were almost matching with the PACIFIC data. So based on this, there was you can say a conclusion that the responses were matching Pacific study, and despite the 40% of the patients starting a little later, the CTRT, after CTRT, that is 42 days after CTRT, the benefit of durvalumab was still maintained. So if somebody has missed the bus, still he or she can catch it. So key takeaways from this discussion is that median overall survival was almost nearly 1.5 times with a hazard ratio of 0.68. The median PFS was nearly tripled with a hazard ratio of 0.51. OS and PFS improvement were seen across all pre-specified subgroup except for the EGFR mutated positive patients, and there was a post-hoc analysis of PDL1 less than 1%, which was showing no benefit. The 5-year overall survival of 43% is quite good compared to 33% in randomized, 33% in the placebo. 1/3 of these patients remained alive as well as disease-free in the durvalumab arm. And patients receiving durvalumab had lower incidence of new lesions, including new brain, that is extrathoracic lesion, compared to the placebo. In durvalumab arm, 8% patients received subsequent IO therapy compared to 25% patients in the placebo arm. And tolerability was quite acceptable. There was pneumonitis a little higher, especially somebody starting quite early, but it was still manageable. And based on the French data, somebody who is received the CTRT and there has been a gap of more than 42 days can still be considered for adding durvalumab. Thank you, everyone, and would be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chintan. Excellent talk and summary of the new era in stage 3 NSCLC, and particularly regarding the immune check inhibitors durvalumab showing significant meaningful increase or improvement in OS and PFS, making it standard of care. I think there is a manageable toxicity profile, and you have very well summarized the 5 years mature data.